I'm a hunter. I like to hunt wild boar specifically. Though I have been deer hunting and have been known to get a turkey for Thanksgiving, I mostly hunt boar. For those of you that don't know, boar are a big problem in the United States. A sow can have 2 litters a year, and it's not uncommon for a litter to consist of 10 or more pigs. Given that pigs eat anything and everything, it's not hard to see why the Department of Fish and Wildlife makes it legal to hunt them with almost no restrictions. In my state, it's illegal to hunt most large mammals with night or thermal vision scopes, with the exception of boar and coyote. I'd been saving for a year. Mostly fun money. It's hard to explain to your wife that a scope that cost literally twice as much as the rifle I was mounting it on was worth it. But I did it. I took it to a range and sighted it in. There was an area that was peppered with boar activity that I knew would be perfect for a night hunt. It was easily accessible with my truck, with easy-to-find spots that I could set up in that overlooked a large, easy-to-navigate clearing. The night started uneventful, mostly me tinkering with my new toy, cycling through the settings. I was a little impatient. I'd spotted multiple deer, but they were out of season, and like I mentioned earlier, my current setup wasn't legal for deer. I moved to another spot I'd seen days earlier that probably wasn't much better than my first, but it gave me something to do and a new angle to look around with my new scope. After an hour or so of glassing the area, it dawned on me. This spot doesn't have much animal activity at all. No rabbit or owls. The deer that I'd seen were hundreds of yards from where I was. Why was this pocket of land so dead at night but lively in the day? I'd set up around 10 p.m. and it was about 2 a.m. when I started to think about packing up, maybe setting up a target before I left and taking some practice shots. I heard a crunch come from the direction I came from before. I panned my scope over and saw the silhouette of a small bear pushing through the bushes. It's important to note that my scope isn't exactly night vision. It's a thermal scope, kind of like a black and white version of what you see in the Predator movies. I adjusted my range and zoomed in a little. I remember jolting a little when I saw that it wasn't really a bear, it was a man. Because he was so low and hunched over, I thought I was looking at a young bear. Is that a game warden? It couldn't be. I would have seen the headlights coming up the road from where I was perched. And where could he have walked from? I was 30 miles away from anything and on public lands. I was about to call out when I adjusted my sights and noticed he was naked. No shoes, pants, or anything. I remember being disturbed by his movements, like a squirrel or something, twitchy and grabbing at the foliage, sniffing around and palming the tree. Was that my tree? The one I'd been leaning against earlier? The thought terrified me. Could he smell me? Then he did something I still have nightmares about today. He squatted and placed his hands in the dirt between his feet and stared straight up like a dog mid-howl. And I heard it, a voice coming from that direction, a very compelling female voice. "Help! I'm lost." There was a long pause, but neither of us moved a muscle. The center of my sights was trained at the dirt in front of his feet. I couldn't bring myself to aim directly at another person. It went against everything I'd been taught about firearms. Were they lost? Was this some guy that had gone crazy out here? Why was his voice so feminine? "Help! Please, I can't walk!" The voice called out. That's when I called bullshit. Not only could he walk, when I first saw him he was traversing the land with ease for a naked person. So good I mistook him for a bear. That's a fucking trap. This guy is trying to lure me to him with a damsel in distress routine. Luckily, the lack of activity before had caused me to pack up most of my gear. I think I may have left behind a hat and a sitting pad, but I didn't give a shit in that moment. I took my eyes off him for a moment to get my pack on. I buckled my chest strap and scrambled for my rifle. To my horror, he was in the same position, but his face was staring in my direction, and I swear I saw a smile. The thermal scope has an effect that makes animals' eyes appear white. How the hell had he heard me get up and put my gear on? He must have easily been 150 yards away. "Fuck off!" I screamed in that direction. He stood upright, and it hit me how tall and skinny he was, easily 6 feet and very lean. He took a couple of long strides in my direction, and I instinctively sent a round sailing above his head into the tree line. He was freaky as hell, but he hadn't really threatened me. What would I tell the cops? I was unwilling and unready to shoot someone. He stopped dead in his tracks and hunched down on all fours. "The next one will fuck you up. Go away." He stayed on all fours, and this time I had my sights trained on the center of him. His eyes were just above the grass like a large cat or something. I was trying to stop my trembling and knew that my voice had cracked a little on that last warning. I was terrified. That standoff probably only lasted a minute or two, maybe less, but it felt like forever. In an instant, he bolted left towards the tree line opposite the road. So much for not being able to walk. I could barely keep him in my scope, he was moving so fast. He disappeared into the brush, and I sent another bullet sailing high in his direction. I racked another round and tried to pocket that mag and swap for a fresh one, but I dropped it and didn't bother looking for it. I wasn't far from my truck, and I wanted to get out of there. I could hear him in the distance, yelling in this weird sound that could have been a laugh or a cry. I scrambled up the trail and arrived at my truck breathless. I tossed my gear into the cab but kept the rifle in the passenger seat and sped off. For the longest time, I told that story from the perspective of having spotted some deranged crackhead living off the land like some kind of caveman. I reported it to Fish and Game, but all they did was scold me for hunting at night alone. Never received an update. It wasn't until I told this story at a camping trip that my nephew told me about wendigos, rakes, and skinwalkers. My story scared the piss out of him, because the spot we were camping was technically the same forest I'd seen the bastard, just 50 miles east of it. I was almost kidnapped at work yesterday. I want to tell this story to warn others. I, an 18-year-old female, live in Maryland, USA. I work at a very popular burger restaurant. I work at the payment window, which is where I stand all night. I'm very friendly. I know sometimes a smile and a compliment can make someone's day a little better. Just this same night before the creeper came, I had a customer tell me I was so happy, and she loved me for it. That gave me the courage and energy to survive this next interaction. I'm used to the awkward comments and stares from old men. I'm sure it's my friendliness that attracts them. Our uniforms are not revealing. They think I'm naive. Maybe I am, a lot more than I thought. I'm fully aware of the dangers of kidnappings. This particular old man came through just before 6. He pretended to not hear his order, then laughed like it was a joke between two friends. This is not uncommon. It's an old man thing. No red flags yet. I tell him his total and he hands me all but the change. When he does this, he waves the money around, making me chase it. I was able to snatch the cash, but again, it was just an old man thing. Not concerned yet. He stared at the company name on my shirt and asked if that was my name. I don't wear a name tag for this reason. I joked that I was going to change my name permanently to that. He perked up. At this point, I should state that he was white, mid-60s, 70s, driving a small white SUV with a kayak on top. He had some scruff on his face and was holding a phone to his ear this entire time. When I finally began to engage with him, he moved the phone to be facing me. Looking back, I believe he was recording me. At no point did he speak into the phone or acknowledge it in any way. He probed with more pressing questions. Here's the thing. I have the same last name as someone from US history. Most old people like talking about that stuff, so I told him my last name. He didn't reflect or laugh. He just accepted and continued asking questions. That's when I started to get this sinking feeling. He still owed me change. I told him. He grabbed another $1 and handed it to me, but he wouldn't let go. He wanted to know my first name, and I dodged answering because I was getting creeped out. He wouldn't let go of the money and was practically drooling for more data about me. I gave him a name I don't use, and he smiled, finally letting go. I got his change and told him to have a nice day. I then immediately left the window and told one of my co-workers about the weird experience. He returned just 2 hours later. I didn't recognize his car on the cameras until he got to my window. I hadn't thought too much about our interaction and was busy texting my dad about whether or not a chicken sandwich was a burger. My stomach dropped when I saw his face. I have many regulars, all of whom I'd have been happy to see. I hope he doesn't become one. I'll call the police. He smiled and said, "Hey, the one with the last name." I half smiled back and wished for the days when we all wore masks. I tell him his total, and he makes me chase the money again. For the entire time, he had his phone against his ear, facing me. He starts asking even more intimate questions about me. I lie or dodge them best I can, giving him zero correct answers, wanting our interaction to be as short as possible. Some of the questions he asked me: how often do you work? What time do you leave? How old are you? For that one I knew he wouldn't leave without a number, and I had a nasty feeling the younger wouldn't be the better. So I said, "Probably 20s. He joked about me being legal. I made a face and tried to get his change even faster. He asked if I had a boyfriend. I was getting more and more nervous, so my answers started getting more sarcastic. I told him boys were trouble. He specifically talked about himself and said he'd treat me right. I handed him his receipt and told him to have a great night. He threw his hands in the air and was saying, "Don't be like that, I'll treat you right." I shut my window and said, "Bye." He made a bit more of a fuss, but eventually drove forward. From his question about when I got off work, I believed he was watching the restaurant. I was shaking by this time and called my mom. She immediately drove up. I talked to my manager, and I was a little unsure of the car's color, so he checked the camera for me. I continued at my window, watching for the old guy, but I didn't see him again. I left an hour early and gave my manager specific instructions to not place a girl at my window. He agreed. "Make sure to always lock your doors." 23-year-old guy here. I live in a pretty safe neighborhood and usually always lock my doors. Last night I apparently didn't. It was not too long after I had taken my dogs out for the last time and was turning off the TV and lights when one of my dogs started growling. Not too weird since he sometimes does that when people walk by the house. He only does it to certain people, not everyone. I then heard the front door open and someone walk in. My dog then started barking. My other dog, who loves all people, came running from the other room to greet our guest. At the same time, I was reacting to what was happening and went, "What the fuck? Who are you?" Standing in the hall was a guy in his mid to late 20s. He was skinny and tall. Oh wait, I don't think I'm in the right place." He genuinely seemed confused. I replied with, "Hell no you aren't. Please get out." He apologized and said he was coming to hang out with a friend, and just have accidentally went to the wrong place. I asked him what house he was looking for, and he said a number that was just a few numbers off from mine. He apologized again and left. He seemed nice and non-threatening, but I was still kind of spooked. This morning, I was ready to laugh the whole thing off. I was planning on telling my neighbor, a couple in their 30s, what happened. I don't know them all too well, but we have talked before. Luckily, I caught one of them when I was taking my dogs out. I didn't want to come off like I was mad or scared over what happened, so I casually said, "I'm sure he told you about it, but your friend paid me a surprise visit last night." My neighbor gave me this confused look and said, "What are you talking about?" "Your friend. He walked into my house last night thinking it was your place." My neighbor was quiet for a second and then said, "I don't want to alarm you, but I have no idea what you're talking about. We didn't have a friend over last night." Forgetting to unlock my bedroom door saved me. Almost a year ago, I, 24 male, was fresh out of college and had just moved into an apartment with my middle school bestie, 23 female, and her fiancé, 25 male. This was after a long period of not seeing her in person. My bestie and I had a long and great relationship with few rocky periods. I didn't know her fiancé well, but had met him a couple times. He came off as kind of rude and loud, but mostly nice enough. I let a lot of little annoying behaviors slide because she was so in love with him. I really just wanted to spend time with my best friend. Over the course of a few months, I slowly discovered that she was trapped in an abusive relationship with the most classic example of a malignant narcissist imaginable. Their fights, really just him raging at her while she cried, escalated to the point where he was completely trashing the apartment, breaking her phone and laptop, hiding her car keys, blocking the door, and grabbing her arm so hard she had bruises, all while hurling out the worst insults he could fathom at the top of his lungs for hours. This man is about a foot taller and 100 pounds heavier than me, so there was nothing I could do other than give her a ride somewhere else away from him until the next day. He didn't like it when I did that. Once it reached the point of physical harm against her, I put my foot down and demanded that he move out, or I would call the cops. He wasn't technically signed onto the lease, so I could have him kicked out. He begged for time to find a new place. He was extremely drunk and high the night he hurt her, and he promised to stay sober until he moved. Not wanting to escalate things, I agreed on the condition that nothing like that ever happen again. My friend and her fiancé broke up soon after that. 3 weeks pass, and everything is going great. Ex-fiancé has found a new place, is in training for a new job, and while still loud and inconsiderate, he hasn't caused any problems so far. I get ready for bed early. I have an important meeting early tomorrow. I put on some comfy pajamas, locking my door before I change out of habit. My bestie is out working, and it's just me upstairs in bed and ex-fiancé downstairs yelling on the phone about something. I tune him out and try to sleep. He's moving out next week. My chest rattles from the booming footfalls up the stairs to my room, waking me from sleep. My eyes snap open to see my bedroom doorknob rattling back and forth. Locked. He lets out a yell of pure malice and bangs on my door. He screams my name, and it's so slurred he sounds like he's trying to impersonate a lizard man. The hinges aren't looking so good. We lived in a crappy, cheap apartment with thin doors. I have to do something before he breaks open the door, right? I say the only thing I can think of. What the fuck? Suddenly, the banging and screaming stops. My doorknob falls still. After a terrifying moment of silence, he says flatly, "Open the door, bud. Just come and open the door." I still laugh about that one. Like after all that, I'd just walk over and open up. Instead, I grabbed my essentials and jumped out the window. I was on the second floor, but we lived on a hill, so the fall wasn't quite that high. Still managed to fall wrong. I hobbled as quickly as I could to my car and peeled away. I called my best friend and warned her not to go home. We made plans for her to stay with a friend after she got off work. I made it to the friend's house and passed out for a few hours. I woke up to a call from my bestie. He traveled all the way to her workplace with a knife and broke in. He assaulted her and held the knife up to her special needs client's throat and said he'd end him in front of her. Thank God a coworker overheard everything in another room and was able to call the police in time for everyone to come out alive. My bestie also said he was on the phone with her while he was banging on my door, and he said he was going to end and make her listen. I was totally alone in the apartment with him, sleeping upstairs in my bed. If I hadn't locked my door that night, would I even still be alive? If I had left my car keys downstairs, would I have been able to get away? When I returned to my apartment the next morning, my bedroom door was completely kicked in. My belongings were scattered everywhere, and the large butcher knives were missing from the kitchen, instead sitting in the corner of the hallway to my room. I almost got abducted, and a strange noise saved my life. This happened a few years ago, around mid-November. My mother and I love being outside and going for walks. This night in particular was freezing, but we decided we wanted to go out for a quick walk. On our way back home, we went down our usual street. It's a neighborhood street that leads to the main road, then back into our neighborhood. We get halfway down the street when I hear a dog bark over the music on my phone. I turn it off and turn to look for the dog. I love dogs, and I didn't know there was a big dog on the street. Context: I know quite a few people on this street, and I know which houses have dogs. Most of the people on the block have small dogs or cats. This came from a house that didn't have a dog, let alone a big dog. I spun around and saw a big dark mass just feet from me. If he stepped 2 more feet, he would have been able to grab me. I immediately felt weird and started rushing back to my mom, who at that point didn't realize I stopped. I turned off my phone and whispered to her that I thought we were being followed. She turned around and grabbed my arm and told me there was 2 men right behind us. We started walking in a zigzag pattern, and sure enough, they followed our every step. Once they caught on that we knew, one of the dudes started to make small chit-chat with us. "Awfully late for y'all to be walking, huh?" I swear his voice sounded like the definition of the sirens' voices. luring sailors to their doom. He continued asking questions to us. My mom kept walking and replying with quick replies. From the sound of his voice, I knew we were in danger, so I went to dial 911. Instead, my mom told me to call my dad as he would be able to get to us quicker because we were almost home. We got to the busy street and looked behind us to see them speed walking towards us. We decided to risk and ran into the middle of the street as cars passed on either side of us. We ran across again and met my dad on that side. We looked across the street and both men were gone. We got into the car and searched the streets, but these guys disappeared into what seemed like thin air. I asked my mom if we would have been kidnapped if I hadn't heard the dog. She asked me what dog. I asked her how she didn't hear this massive dog bark, especially with how good her hearing is. I still have no clue what it was I heard, but I do know it most likely saved my life.